My name is Heather Meitner, and I work for the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families. I'm a training manager there, and I started out as a social worker doing ongoing work, and have had multiple roles over the years, both in internally in the organization, as well as a stint in the provider world, doing work with the contracted providers that serve families. I've been a supervisor and a manager, and I am now a trainer and coach for the implementation of signs of safety in STM practice in our state, and have been coaching here in Northern California for the past year. So it's been an exciting privilege to be out here on the West Coast. I absolutely loved being able to come out here when the weather is so great. Oh my gosh, I was like, really, 75 and no humidity? People are cooking at home, like it's in the 90s for days and days on end, so it's worked out really well. I wanted to get started by kind of giving a caveat. So the handouts that you have are handouts that would be for, bless you, a half day, full day training, right? Each of them could be 2 to 4 hours each. We only have now an hour and 45 minutes to be able to do this. So I'm going to skip a lot of sections. I'm not a fan of death by PowerPoint. I don't know if any of you are, but I prefer to try to hit the key target points. I think the most important thing is practical application, get into a case example, and then I want to have more discussion with you guys if possible. It's a lot of information in a short period of time, but I'm going to see what I can do to try to make it feel like it's more didactic and not quite so just me talking at you. And initially we did the introduction to the morning group, and we're going to start actually with creating danger and safety statements here. Okay, so the first thing I want to ask is, how much exposure have you guys had to signs of safety and safety mapping in general? So scale of 1 to 5, 1, 2 being you've had limited exposure or no exposure, 2, 3 you've had some, 4, 5 you've had a lot and you're doing it. So who's kind of in the 1s and 2 category? Okay, great, helpful. 2s and 3s? Just trying it on, learning a little more about it. 4s and 5s where you've been able to do it a lot? Okay, very cool. So I've got a very mixed audience, and I'll do my best to train to all 3 different needs. If I say something that seems abstract or you want more information, feel free to interrupt and just ask a question, raise your hand, whatever. We want this to feel informal and for you to have the opportunity to really learn from each other just as much as for me. I want this to feel two-way street. So what we wanted to start with is that safety mapping allows us to collect the information about what's working well, what we're worried about, and what needs to happen, and organize it in a way that helps us internally get on the same page, and then even more importantly, get on the same page with the family and folks in the community who care about this kid and their family. So how we organize the information is one piece of it. It gives us a sense of our content about what we're worried about and our level of worry. How worried are we based on the information that we have about the patterns in the past and what's happened currently? We want to look equally at the patterns of harm, right? What are the ways in which this caregiver's actions have hurt this child in the past? And what are the ways in which the caregiver's actions protected the child and kept the child safe in the past? We have to equally assess both safety and danger. So this is kind of a quick review, but what we say matters, the words that we use matter. And so how we define danger and safety is really, really important. Yes?
Can you turn your little thing on so we can hear you better?
You know what? This is just for videotaping purposes, so I will speak louder so you can hear me better. I'm sorry, my voice, I've been doing this day in and day out, so my voice is getting a little bit hoarse. So forgive me for the laryngitis coming on. Poor Yuba County, by the time I get there on Wednesday, they're not going to be able to hear me at all. I will need a mic. But they are videotaping this so that they can share it with folks who weren't able to attend, or counties that are so small and so far away, I won't be able to go there. So I'll do my best to speak up. And please remember that too, as you're sharing examples, make sure everybody can hear you. So danger and risk are not on a continuum. Danger and safety are on a continuum, meaning the opposites of one another. So we define danger as the past acts of harm by a caregiver that have negatively impacted, right, hurt a child. And so it's really clear that we also think about not just the past, what's happened, but what are we worried could happen in the future? And so we're looking for the actions that have impacted the child in a harmful way. On the opposite side of that is safety. What are the acts of protection that the caregiver has demonstrated over time that has kept the child safe? If the child's acts of protection can mitigate this specific danger, we can close the case, right? Or potentially return a child home, et cetera, et cetera. So making sure we're clear with the family about what it is we have to see in order to mitigate this, it's specific to their behavior. And sometimes we put services in place as a stepping stone to help them get to that behavior. But services does not equal safety, right? They're just a stepping stone to hopefully help the caregiver change the behavior. However, I know when I was a social worker, I always felt better when there were service providers involved. I felt like it was another set of eyes. It was someone who could assess and I could see, does it match? Are they seeing what I'm seeing or does it look different? So we can take advantage of our communication and our collaboration with the service providers, but at the end of the day, everybody has to be on the same page that the family's taking steps to change a behavior. We're looking for the presence of that behavior, not just the absence of danger. Does that make sense to folks? Right? And how we document it is really important. Are we equally documenting the signs of safety, thus the title of this practice, the ways in which we see the family doing things right that protect kids? Not just anything, but the things that protect kids, right? And does it actually protect kids from the stuff we were worried about that got us involved in the first place? So it really hones our focus. Now, risk, where does that fall? That's the likelihood of future maltreatment. That's the likelihood. That's the how worried should we be. Does our worry meter just go up a little of the ways, or is it way over here where it's a very high risk case and the likelihood of repeat maltreatment in a short period of time is high? We know Child Protection Services intervention is actually going to benefit that family more the higher the risks that they are. So all the factors that you fill out on the STM tools, right, those indicators, safety threats, right, we know that if a family has a ton of safety threats, our intervention is going to help them keep their kids safe in the future. So even if it's an intact family and the kids never get detained, right, we know that our intervention is going to make a difference for that family for high and very high risk cases. Those low risk cases statistically stay on the same trajectory, which is a very low likelihood of repeat maltreatment. It's 0.01% chance that they'll hurt their kids. So we have to be mindful about where we put our resources and our energy. And as a system, we can learn a lot from how we make sure we intervene in the right families who need us the most and we're going to benefit the most. So what we're worried about versus how worried we are the two pieces we want to pay attention to. So that's kind of a crash course in making sure our language and our definitions are the same. And the other thing we talk about is if the SDM tools are posts in our fence along the way, they're at decision-making points, very specific decision-making points at specific times in the casework practice. Signs of safety philosophy and the little concepts and activities we can do with the family at each step are different. So mapping a case is one thing. And today Chelsea wanted us to talk about how do you help build a network who can implement really good safety planning. And there's some key approaches that you've got in your handouts that we'll go over today in order to help the family and their network keep their kids safe for the long haul so that when we back out, they're not dependent upon us. And then we talked earlier about our mentality and our personal and systemic approach to the work. There's a continuum of a child rescue approach where kids need to be protected from those bad, evil families, those parents who hurt them, and we pull kids out in its extreme. And the way out on this extreme is family preservation, which is to keep families intact at all costs. And how is that dangerous in its extreme? Anyone?
I don't think you're having the right assessing tools
right
at that time.
Yeah, right. So in either direction, it would be unbalanced, right? And we would just be focused here on keeping the family together, and kids could get hurt, right? If it's not safe. Child rescue, how do kids get hurt if we pull kids out of a home that they shouldn't be pulled out of? Emotionally traumatized, damaged. We always ask ourselves, you guys ask yourselves those questions all the time, is our intervention going to do less harm than they've already experienced in the situation in their family? So we're always weighing, does the system intervention actually help this child be protected from additional harm, or are we contributing right, to their emotional trauma. So we have to be really sensitive to that. And signs of safety asks us to make a balanced assessment right in the middle and try to keep our pendulum from swinging back and forth. When the media gets a hold of a case and the case swings way out here, what does that look like for our system, right? Front door is wide open. Hotline screens everything in just in case, right? Back door gets locked. Don't close a case or dismiss just in case. Right now it's too hot of a topic. Does that happen here like it happens every place else? Yes, you're not unique, right? Unfortunately, it's a worldwide problem in child protection. What signs of safety tries to help us do is remember our wits about us when the media gets a hold of a case, when your higher ups are breathing down your neck about who did what when and why wasn't this documented and what was the decision-making thinking around this moment in time, et cetera. It's really helping us to document always in ways that says, what did we observe? What did others observe about what was the caregiver behavior, how it had an impact on the child, and specifically, what is it we're asking them to do differently, right? Not just stop doing, but what do they have to do differently in order to change that? And are we observing progress or not, right? That's kind of cutting to the chase of what we need to see. And it's easy for our systemic habits, if you will, or what I call policy mythology. Do you have that here where it's not capital P policy written down anywhere, but it's kind of the unspoken practice in the office, right? Different managers have different policy mythology. How does that happen, right? You know, if you go to one manager, you get one response, but if you go to a different one, they might have a different approach because they're somewhere different along the continuum. It's human nature. And so by all of us trying to be more consistent in our practice, we can get to a place where we see that happening less and less and less. Will we ever be 100% consistent? No, because we're still human beings. So it's just part of the deal. So we're going to talk about what do you do when you're mapping a case, either internally in a staffing or preferably with a family. And the more often we can map with families, the better it gets. The information is more accurate. The people who have the answers to the questions are at the table, and we can get more clear information. So we want you to think about an appreciation of the importance of understanding and agreement. We have to make sure we have clarity of understanding, shared understanding with the families, and shared agreement about danger and risk statements and safety goals. So I have the gradients of agreement posted over there. Sorry, my handwriting is messy. I was writing it pretty fast earlier. But it acknowledges that just because we say, do you agree to do this, and everybody nods, that it might not mean the same thing to all people. So making sure that we're clear about how much do we agree, right, has an impact on the case. If you create a case plan and you put tasks on it and you ask the parent on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being you love it, 5 being no way, where are you at with doing this task? And they tell you, oh, I'm a 2. How does that make you feel? They like it. They're probably going to do it. What if all the tasks on the case plan, they're a 4 or a 5? Not so much, right? If we stop and check in with folks, do we have shared understanding about what I'm asking you to do or what you're saying you'll do? And then do we have agreement that you'll do it? If the case plan says mother will, and there's a laundry list that she has not agreed to, the likelihood of it getting done decreases, right? But if we've had the conversation and they're saying they agree, it can say mother agrees to. And then we talk about what she's agreed to do and the expectation of what the behavioral change is going to do for the child. So you want those 2 components on the case plans, and we'll get more specific about what that looks like as we kind of go on through this. The collaborative process of creating the statements is really important, and we're going to give you some templates. Like you can literally kind of copy as you're new at this and trying it on, and then go from there. So this is our safety map. Does everybody remember the map? You've seen this before? Is there anybody who's never seen the safety map before? Because I'll go into more detail. Okay. So the definitions are up here. And what you're doing is you're basically saying, we got 3 questions. What are the worries? What works well? What needs to happen? And we're breaking out what goes north versus south on both sides based on that center question in the middle. What is the caregiver's actions, their impact on the child? Sometimes we can't find out the impact. Sometimes we're speculating what the impact is. Other times it's crystal clear and everybody's in agreement. But the more information we get to answer that question, the more clear it can be to us if it's really danger or just a complicating factor. I'm also mindful of when I say just a complicating factor, that we don't want to minimize complicating factors. It's very important information in the case. We want to pay close attention to how it can contribute to the success or challenges that the family experiences and what that child's life is going to be like. Do you guys find internally that you struggle sometimes to agree on whether it's really safety or just a supporting strength? Yep, can I see the nod or show of hands? Yeah, right, so that's a normal part of adopting this practice. Every jurisdiction that implements signs of safety, it's like almost like we go through our own developmental stages of doing this, and over time you will get closer together on how you view it. However, you will probably never have 100% agreement. So that's okay, so you don't have to strive for that. Might as well just relax right now. There's always going to be dialogue. And what's important about that is there's a researcher from England named Eileen Monroe, and she's done 30 years of child fatality reviews studies, and she's found that the more we talk about it together, the more information that different parties have and contribute, the more we minimize error in child welfare practice. So when the provider has information that's different than the family's information, that's different than the department's information, the more often we're communicating about those things, the more likely we're all going to get on the same page about how we view this. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there are any counties with that gradients agreement, because I'm thinking of case plans that are signed or not signed.
Yes.
And sometimes I've gotten cases from other workers where the case plan is signed, but the parent claims, oh, I never even saw that. But here's your signature. So if we have that gradient and agreement next to their signature.
I love that idea. You would actually know what level of agreement they had. Because if they're a 4, it says I'm not comfortable, but I won't stand in the way of the plan. And I can give you guys a 1-pager. I know I have it, or I believe I have it in the car. Brad and the gang saw my big boxes of handouts in the trunk. But it's a nice 1-pager, and it's really easy to understand, and the family can understand it. You can use it with the family. And if you were to document that, how amazing would that be? I don't think anybody has done that yet. Wow, Butte County could be the first. What do you think of that? You guys could be like trailblazers. Because that way, we're at least know what we're working with. And we can say, what would it take? This is always the follow-up question. What would it take to move you from a 4 to a 3? What would it take to move you from a 3 to a 2? Notice I didn't say 4 to a 1, because what does that do to families? Overwhelm, right? They freak out. But 4 to a 3, 3 to a 2. Oh, and supervisors in the room? How many supervisors do we have here? Anyone? Yes, it works really well in supervision. You're behind in your documentation. What would it take to move you from a 4 to a 3 to a 2, right? It's a parallel process, right? So being able to internally practice the way that we want our workers to do with families is extremely helpful as well. So what we want to do is get all of that information organized, and once we've broken it to safety versus supporting strengths, how do we summarize the bullet points in like 2 or 3 sentences? We want to get the immediate understanding of what acts of protection did this parent take in the past or since we opened the case. Maybe the case has been open for, just the investigation period. It's been 10 days, maybe 30 days, whatever. What have they done already that is protected the child from the harm or the risk, right? We want to acknowledge what's really working well and not fluff, the stuff that actually is relevant to the danger. The harm and danger statement comes from what happened in the past, right, that was harmful to the child. And sometimes parents don't admit that they hurt their kids. Did you ever have that happen? Right, every day? So being able to say, we don't need you to admit or own or take responsibility. What we need you to do is partner with us for future safety, right? So if you were me, a child protection worker, and you read this report of abuse and neglect, would you be worried if you were a child protection worker and you read this? Well, okay, yeah, if I were you, I guess I'd be worried. But it didn't happen. I didn't do it, right? And then they go into that place. Denied child abuse does not preclude us from having a safety planning process with that perpetrator of abuse. So we feel better when folks own it, admit it, and take responsibility, right? We've believed over time that if they have insight, they're more likely to take action to change a behavior. This practice says that's not always the case. A lot of times our family go through therapy, they get some insight, and then what happens? They do the behavior again, right? So dad drives drunk with his kids. They get in an accident, child protection gets called, children's services goes out, and dad says, okay, I get it, I'm an alcoholic, I'm going to AA, I have a sponsor, thank you so much for helping me see my issues. And then next week, he drives drunk with his kids again. Has that happened before, where you've had repeat behavior even though they, quote, admit that what they did was wrong? We have to move to the next level of really getting clear that it's not just ownership and admission that we need, it's really what we need is changing the behavior so that they can keep their kids safe. I'm not gonna get stuck in a power struggle with a dad, right, about the fact that he didn't admit it. I'm gonna say, are you willing to partner with us? You want us out of your life? We think it could be protecting you and your kids if no one in the community feels the need to file a report again in the future. Would you agree with that? And dad says, yeah, I sure as hell don't want anyone to file, and I don't want to have a lawyer and go to court and blah, blah, blah. Okay then, so are you at a minimum willing to walk through this process and partner with us? Because what we need to do is make sure that there's a group of people who know you, love you, and get you, and care about your kids and your family, and that they're willing to plan and create a plan and implement it that's going to keep your kids safe so that you feel good about it and we feel good about it. Never once am I saying, you can't hit your kid again. See the difference? We're engaging the parent while we're solving the problem, not isolating and alienating them in our attempts to solve the problem. See the difference? Thoughts about that so far? It was hard for me at first because I really like that whole, you gotta admit that you did it wrong. You gotta tell me that you hurt your kid, especially when there's an unexplained injury to an infant, right? Those are the cases that stress us out the most. You know, we don't, the medical examiner says it's inconclusive evidence whether it was shaken baby or not, but the baby survived and now we gotta figure out, can this baby ever go home? How often do we send babies home that we think may have been shaken? Ever? Can you think of cases where they've gone home? Anyone? Maybe one? Right? It's rare. So how do we figure out, because what we are finding out is more often than not, we don't have conclusive evidence, and sometimes it's kind of like people who are prosecuted and served 25 years in jail and then DNA evidence proves that they're innocent. We're finding sometimes that the babies, there were other reasons that explained the injury that look similar and consistent with shaken baby, but that it actually wasn't shaken baby. So how do we get better at our assessment of what is it in the first place? And then secondarily, even if it was shaken baby, is it possible to safely reunite the kids of those parents? And I would say yes, only if there's a plan for a lot of people to be in that household all the time. And if those babies are completely supervised with the parents all the time, baby gets the benefit of being raised by their biological parents, right? And to a place where they're old enough to keep themselves safe. And sometimes families can pull a network of people who can do that. Other times they can't. And we'll talk more about that as we go through this time. And so that's the what. What has to happen? Mom needs to parent her child safely, right? Even when she's depressed, even when she's stressed out, even when she's struggling. And then the how is the safety planning process. So Signs of Safety proposes that once we map and get on the same page with a good danger, a harm and danger statement and safety statement, then we can get a network of people together who are going to actually plan the what and how. So how do you create these harm and danger statements? So this is in your blue handout, and it reminds us that we want to make sure that we have a harm statement with what happened in the past, and it's helpful to add who reported or disclosed, right? Is there an admission here or not, right? Did mom and child both report, or did just child report, right? Or did extended family say, yep, this is what happened, but mom isn't in agreement with that? So you can be clear about who disclosed about what has happened, and that's the caregiver behavior, and then what's the impact on the child? We always have to connect the behavior with the impact. So when we're thinking about complicating factors, we know that they're often domestic violence, mental illness, so some kind of major diagnosis, substance abuse, drug abuse, alcoholism, poverty, right? Age, maybe it's a really, really young parent. So all the things that can contribute to worrying us are only going to be child protection worries if those things contributed to an impact on a child. So can two parents fight when their kids aren't home and then their kids not be affected? Technically, right? Can somebody take their child to the grandmother's house for the weekend, leave them there, go party all weekend, and then come back sober and get their kids? Right? Now, if those kids, Monday through Friday, aren't getting up on time, aren't going to school on time, don't have their medical records updated, don't have the ability to feel like they feel safe in their own home, that's a different conversation, right? But those situations where a using parent can still function and meet the kids' needs, we wouldn't be warranted to be involved. Ideally, would we like to see all of our clients clean, sober, medicated, in treatment, right? Absolutely, and most parents parent better under those circumstances. However, you have those parents that even when they're clean and sober, not so much in the parenting role with their kids, right? They still can't seem to do that. So you want to make sure that all of this incorporates physical, emotional, health, welfare of the child, regardless of whether they're clean and sober or not. Can they still meet their minimum standards and sufficient safety for their kids? So Cheryl is someone that came in the morning example, so I'll give you the quick and dirty. Cheryl turned on the gas of her home stove, locked herself in the kitchen, which exposed both the kitchen and the rest of the apartment to high levels of toxic fumes. Both of her children were home at the time, were exposed to the high levels of fumes, and lost consciousness as a result. Do you have any confusion about what happened? Or does that make sense? So what did she do? What type of case is this in our lingo?
She's suicidal,
Yeah,
actually.
right, it's a suicide attempt case, right? But anywhere in there do you see suicide attempt? Signs of Safety asks us to use the family's language, use the behavioral description, and save the jargon for our internal discussions. But when we document it, we want to document it this way too, in language that a 7-year-old child could understand, so that we get to a point where we're able to communicate with all the professionals, the courts, probation, any therapists or providers, that this is why we're worried. This is why the parent knows that we're worried. And there's not kind of judgment, labeling, opinion, and there's no confusion about words that could possibly be open for interpretation. Or just, the word suicide attempt could mean 100 different ways that they did it, right? This specifically, we know she turned on the gas in her stove. And what we also know about Cheryl through an interview is that she put the girls in the other room, in the living room, opened the window, shut the door between the living room and the kitchen, and then went back in and turned on the gas. Why would it be important for us to find that out?
She's safety, protecting the kids.
Yeah, she did actually think about their well-being right before, in such a desperate state, right, before she did that. And so we want to give her hope in that we believe that she has the capacity to heal, right, and to get back to a place where she can parent effectively with her kids. But we're worried that unless she addresses this stuff, it could happen again. Notice we didn't say mother was suicidal, mother tried to kill herself, mother tried to kill her kids, mother has mental illness, right? So we want to move away from the jargon that we traditionally use, because it's easier, it's kind of a catch-all, right? We can write less. We kind of rely on that some days when we're really busy. But this gives a clear description that no one can dispute. So let's hypothetically say this became your case a year from now, when it came back in, or 2 years from now. And you read this versus mom attempted suicide. See how much more information that is for you, getting that down the road? The danger statement is based on that harm. What are we worried is going to happen in the future, right? So who's worried? Is everybody worried about the same stuff? Or is just the department worried? So you're going to start a danger statement with the department, the family, and the hospital is worried that blah, 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 blah. Or just the department's worried that. And whatever we're worried that, we state. And then mom might be worried about something different. So we just want to be clear that we're not always going to agree eye to eye on everything, and that the family may have a different perspective, and we can still capture that as well. So CPS and the doctors at the hospital, not mom, are worried that Cheryl may try to injure herself again in the future, and that the children could become injured or hurt as a result, right? So this is clear about who's worried. And Cheryl's able to say, she can't dispute that because we're worried. We didn't try to say that she's worried about this, right? And so each of these statements we want to have shared with the caregiver if it wasn't co-created with them, the extended network of people who wrap around this family to support them, and any appropriate providers who are going to continue services with the family. A lot of times our families need services over an extended period of time, longer than we remain involved. And so we can get third-party billable services, so something maybe we're paying for now can continue on after we can close the case, right? So being able to make sure that we get all these folks at the table and that they all hear why we're worried. And then we can assess, do they share in those worries or do they have different worries? Do they have worries we didn't even know about? So it gives us a whole lot of potential when we're all on the same page to be crystal clear about what we're looking for the parents to do differently. I mean, what do they need to step up to? And it allows us to make sure that we're focused on what child protection intervention should be focused on and doesn't get sucked into what I call casework drift, right? Where we find ourselves doing all this other stuff for families that isn't part of our job description in the first place, right? So when they start asking you to help them get new housing, and that's not an issue. We didn't have a problem with the house. The house is fine. But they all of a sudden see us as a resource, right? And we all of a sudden become the be-all and end-all. And so it's helping remind us that we have a very focused purpose with families and that we're happy to refer them to other folks who focus on those purposes that might not be ours. So here's Kim and Paul. And I'm going to take you through Kim and Paul's mapping, danger statement, and safety goal statement. And then what did it take for them to build a network and create a nice safety plan with Kim and Paul? So that's how we're going to try to spend the rest of our time, and hopefully you guys can start thinking about what makes sense to about this to you and what might worry you about this practice. What are the things that you want to learn more about so that you feel effective trying them out with one of your cases? So Kim is a single mom, and her son Paul is 10, and she decided to use heroin while she was caring for Paul, and she was cooking dinner while shooting up heroin, and she overdosed and passed out. And she was cooking dinner, and the house nearly caught on fire. And so Paul is placed, he was detained, and he's placed with his Aunt Donna and her wife Ann. And so that's the point at which we have this case. So it's a, I don't know, it's probably been open for several months. They bring the family in, they do the list of worries. So the initial incident that brought it in this time was the main worry. The landlady heard the fire alarm and had to call the police and open the door, right? Kim has an extensive history of heroin use and reports she's been struggling with addiction for the past 15 years. And this led to one referral to the agency 4 years earlier when Paul came to school smelling like urine and feces, and the school filed the report. So in 4 years, there was only one report. Kim attributes this incident to a growing depression after losing her job as a saleswoman at the local department store, and she's been looking for work for more than 14 weeks and she can't find anything. And her sister tells you that she's verifying that she's pounded the pavement and she can't find anything. She stopped attending NA meetings over 2 years ago because they, quote, get kind of preachy and they're not good times. So we put Kim's words in quotes to create an experience of validation for her, right? The more we can use the family's actual language, the more they feel heard in the process. And Kim has also been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and attention deficit disorder. So there were a lot more worries that came up in the meeting, but this is the crux of them. Kim stated when asked directly what were her worries, that she's worried because she doesn't know what the heck is going on with the agency. She's doing what she needs to do, and she doesn't understand why her son hasn't come home yet. Have you heard that before from families? In almost every case, right? Documenting it helps them be a more active part of the process. Kim says, I'm worried about my son growing up without his mom and I want him back. So that's helpful for us. What kind of information is that giving us about her as a mom? Yeah.
She cares about his feelings too.
Exactly. She's thinking about him. She cares about his feelings. She recognizes it might be detrimental to him in some way to not grow up with his mom, right? She appreciates her sister's help, but that Donna can be a, quote, know-it-all, and it's hard to work with her sometimes to take care of Paul, right? So that's acknowledging that their relationship as siblings isn't perfect, and kinship care can be really hard and stressful on a family. So we've captured all the worries, and we have to write a harm and danger statement. And we want to make sure that it has 3 components every time, right? List the people who are worried about what past behavior and about what past impact, and then a danger statement is what is the future worries. Harm is past, danger, future. Possible impact on the child, right? We want to make sure that we're thoughtful about realistically what are we worried could happen and really spelling that out for families. I'm going to skip this example so that I can tell you more about Kim and Paul since we're limited on time, but you have it in your handout. It's hard to make that assessment balanced if we don't know what's working well. So what's working well is Kim reports she was clean and sober for 4 years before this incident, and her sister Donna backs up that report. We like to verify, right, information that families are sharing with us. And during that time, Paul came to school clean, on time, and with his work done. So in this case, Kim is a parent who parents effectively when she's clean. She isn't the parent who can be clean and still doesn't parent very well. See the difference? So you got to kind of think differently about different families. Her past work with the agency, she worked with her worker. She had a home-based outreach team. She went into drug treatment and ensured that Paul came to school and was appropriately clothed and bathed. So that's strength or safety, act of protection. How would you view this if you're doing the mapping? Safety, an act of protection, or is it a strength?
Except the last sentence could be an act of protection.
Right? This has the component about the impact it had on Paul, that he was appropriately clothed and bathed, and he was going to school. So this technically could rise to the safety statement, something she did in the past, right, that showed protection of her child. Both of these things are, right? So we have her clean and sober for 4 years, and during that time, Paul came to school clean, on time, and with his work done, right? And if that's what we were worried, because it was the school who reported and said he wasn't okay. And so that's really important that we notice both of these statements have the caregiver, the behavior, and the impact it had on the child. Make sense? So we don't want to make assumptions by omission, by leaving out part of a sentence about what the impact on the kid is. So you always want to make sure you add, and what did that have to do with the caregiving of a child, right? Paul was able to go into kinship foster care placement with his aunt and her wife. He was able to stay in the same school system, and it was reported by both the aunt and the guidance counselor that he continues to thrive despite these changes. Is that a strength or safety? Strength, right? Yep, it's a nice thing that he's with a relative and that he's still doing well in school.
Those collateral people, those relative care people, or people who are part of the safety network?
You know, that's a good question, because by our original definition, it's the caregiver's behavior and the impact. So technically, if we were worried about Donna as a caregiver, even though she's kinship, I want you to think about kinship homes that you have right now in your caseload. And sometimes it's harder for kinship families, right? They haven't necessarily been through our training. They haven't been prepared. How do you interact with your sister now that you got her kids in your care? It gets a little bit dicey. We can use this process with that family. And if Donna was the caregiver we were worried about, we could absolutely use this as safety. But technically, because it's Kim's behavior that we're using our definition around, this would still just be a strength. Make sense? Okay. It's those nuanced definitions. And it's funny, I had a mapping not too long ago with the attorneys of the parents and the kids came to the table, and they kept wanting to put the strengths in the safety box or the complicating factors in danger. And fortunately, the one attorney kept saying, oh wait, what's the definition again? And she would see it up there and go, oh, that doesn't apply. Oh yeah, oh no, it's not the caregiver. Oh, it's the kid's behavior, not the caregiver. And so she was able to put herself in her place, if you will, and get it right, because she kept applying those definitions. And I thought, all right, lawyers are applied. They have to know the definition of every single law. And that actually was used to our advantage to help get them right on the right page as we're having lawyers in a clinical meeting. So it was pretty cool. Oh, I forgot the last one. Kimberly made a plan with Donna in the past that if anything were to happen to Paul, he was to go stay with her. That's a strength, right? So that she had already thought about that. Right, because we ask our families that, God forbid anything were to happen to you, who would you want to take care of your kids? We should know that during the ER process. We should know that at the get-go, just in case, because by the time the case gets to you, you don't want to be flipping through the record at 4:30 on a Friday trying to figure out, did we ever have this conversation? Is there somebody who could potentially be a placement resource? identified. Also, Kim has attended drug treatment, including detox, 5 times in the past. Twice she's been in inpatient substance abuse treatment. She completed inpatient right after this situation where she was cooking and passed out. And she now attends NA meetings again. And she has a relapse plan and is able to talk openly about it. That makes us happy. We like that. However, we want to know what that relapse plan is and what's Paul's role in it. Did any of you think about Paul being 10 and that it took the landlady to call 911 and break the door down? Okay, tell me what went through your head there.
About him not calling?
Yeah.
What stopped him from doing so? Is
Right.
he delayed?
Right, what do I need to know about Paul that he didn't take any action here? Maybe mom hasn't prepared him for emergencies, right? Or maybe,
Want him called.
Maybe he don't want to get
exactly, right?
You know,
Maybe,
don't call.
maybe he's the kid who's sitting at his aunt's now in placement going, if I only went into the kitchen and got the stove, turned it off before it boiled over, right? Our 10-year-old Paul's gonna blame himself, isn't he? Very different than 14-year-old Paul, who might just be pissed, right? So getting the clarity about age and stage of development and wanting to ask questions for follow-up. What more do we need to know about that? What do we need to know about the relapse plan and how it's really gonna keep him safe, not just her from using, right? So there's a both and there. Donna and Ann have been able to help Kim financially, and they're willing to continue to do so. Okay, I'm just gonna, for the record, that almost never happens, right? So that's a unique circumstance for this case. Right, right? Like they're trusting that she's gonna pay her bills and rent and utilities in this case. So that's information for us, right? We know that Donna and Ann really believe she can do right by this process when she's clean. Kim is in individual treatment, attending regularly, taking her meds. She states, I want Paul back and will do whatever it takes to make that happen. Paul says, I love my mom and I want to be back with her. That's helpful information for us to know. Donna and Ann said Kim's a great mom, that she'd been doing really well, and we think she can be clean and sober again. If Kim and her sister and her wife were telling us the opposite, that's information for us. When we get to know the extended family and the supports in their life and they're saying, oh yeah, no way, no, right? And she only has 4 weeks, not 4 years of sobriety under her belt, right? We're gonna take a different approach with that family. We're gonna have to put much more rigorous safety plan in place than with someone that we believe has this kind of support behind them and belief. And the school hadn't had any problems to report with Paul since he's been in that school. He's been both in her care and in kinship care while he's been in that school, and the school didn't even really know. So he's doing very well. So we want to create a safety statement about what's happened to date, that's already happened, a goal about what needs to happen in the future in order for us to feel the child's protected, and a plan for how that goal is going to be met. We oftentimes say, this is what we need to see, but we don't define how we want them to do it, or they don't think their way through. Like, you know what I mean? Sometimes we might make a laundry list of things, but we don't really take the time to make sure we checked for understanding and agreement, and that's important so we can get to the how. So wanting to make sure we have the behavior of the parent and what they've done, the impact on the child in their language is really key. When we write goals like this, safety goals, about what we want to see happen, we want to avoid dead man's goals. How many have heard Phil Dechter train? He's the one who kind of devised this, so a few of you have had exposure. It would mean, in this case, Mr. Smith would have to be dead to 100% guarantee you he wasn't going to hurt Billy. So we unfortunately set up Mr. Smith. When we frame our goals, Mr. Smith will not hurt Billy. Mr. Smith will refrain from abusing substances. Mr. Smith will right? So we want to make sure that we create action goals. Goals that specifically state what the parent is going to do that's hopefully different, as opposed to what they're not going to do. I had a mom say to me many years ago, so let me get this straight, Heather. I've been drinking for 14 years, and I've only been a parent for 10 of those years. I've never not been drinking when I'm a mom, so I can stop drinking, but what am I supposed to do when I'm not drinking? And like my little light bulb went off in my 22-year-old head. And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting thing to think about. And I had to rephrase all the case plan tasks to be what she's supposed to do as opposed to what she's not supposed to do, right? So what did it mean to supervise her kids, to make a daily routine so that they knew what to expect, that she would put meals together for these kids and that they didn't have to fix their own food, that they weren't waking her up in the morning, that she was setting an alarm and getting out of bed and getting herself cleaned up in order to do the same for them. I had to spell out all of those things for her. And so that's an action goal. Right? Mr. Smith will discipline Billy only in ways that won't hurt him. And then we're going to find out about the exceptions in that home in the past that have allowed him to be able to actually be parenting in a way that still disciplined Billy but didn't physically hurt him. Did they use timeout? Did they use rules, rewards, consequences? What are the things that they've done? And we have to find out what worked well for them. And if they don't have any answers that kind of are sufficient for us, ask them if they're willing to try on some new techniques. Maybe one of our service providers, that's the goal they're going to work on, right, with that family. Making sure that family members will work together to keep Billy safe. We're not just relying on Mr. Smith here, because Mr. Smith's been open like a revolving door 6 times, right? We need to do it different this time. We want Mr. Smith to have a support network of family and friends. We're going to work together to help him keep Billy safe. And that when they're able to vouch that he's doing it, we feel all that much better about the circumstances. So those goals have to make sure that we're going to identify what's sufficient safety and that we operationalize them so that they don't leave us any less reassured that the dangers have been addressed. Have you ever been in court and the opposing counsel has you're testifying on the stand and said, Your Honor, my client has done every single one of these tasks on this case plan and still the department won't dismiss and return this child home. Still, the department won't close this case. Come on now, let's see it. Yes? Happens all the time. We unintentionally get slayed by our own service plans, case plans, because we put a bunch of services that didn't explain the behavioral change and the impact it had to have on the child, right? So it can say, participate in psychological evaluation with so-and-so provider. Attend therapy weekly with such and such provider on such and such day and time, right? Maintain sobriety, refrain from using meth, go to this treatment program, make sure that they meet with us monthly, right? Think about your laundry list of the drop-down box of services. Those things can still be done and the behavior around how they parent their kids not change. So what we have to do is get creative about sitting with that parent and figuring out what specifically do we want them to get out of therapy and how it's going to affect their ability to parent their kids. What is it we hope to walk away with when we get the evaluation results and we find out that they've attended their treatment meetings or their med appointments and they're taking their medication? So it's taking it all to that next level of connecting those dots back to the danger and safety that we have to see, the safety that mitigates the danger that we have to see in the home. So we want to make sure that we're crystal clear, that we identify what do we need to see happening in the family to satisfy everyone. The court's going to be satisfied, the family's going to be satisfied, the agency's going to be satisfied, the kid's going to be satisfied, that the child protective concerns have been addressed and the children will be safe enough in the care of parents or caregivers. So we have to make sure they're directly related to the danger statement. We don't want to use generic terms. We want to describe the behavior. Be specific and describe what we're expecting the parents to do differently, as I said, rather than what we want to stop them, see them stop doing. Be collaboratively made. The more often you can write them with a family, the more buy-in you're going to get on our gradients of agreement, right? They're going to be in that 1, 2, 3 range. And to write in straightforward, measurable language. That piece is really, really key. Questions so far? I know I'm flying through this. But does it making sense? Okay. So here's Cheryl. She cannot be alone with her children if she's a danger to herself or others. Cheryl needs to show CPS that she's no longer a danger to herself or others, and she might do this through, right? We got to get into the how. We need a plan to address these 4 issues, addressing her depression, right? Making sure she can ask for help if needed, and that she can keep her kids safe while she's struggling, right? So just because you're struggling doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to parent your kids, but it's that you got the support and the people and all the steps. It's like a phone tree, right? How many people have a sponsor, right, in their recovery? And then when the sponsor's not home, they go, I tried my sponsor, they weren't home, so, you know, I couldn't help it, I used. We like them to have more than just one person to call. Because what if it's after hours and you're not at your desk? Or it is during hours and you're not at your desk? and your supervisor's not at her desk, right? So being able to be clear with them about what we mean. So you can use this and literally copy and paste it for every case and then fill in the blanks for your case. So-and-so, that's the parents, will need to work with CPS and a safety network of family, friends, and professionals to develop a safety plan that will show everyone that, that's where you fill in the danger statement for your case. CPS will need to see the safety plan in place and working for a period of at least X number of months so that everyone is confident that the safety plan will keep working after CPS withdraws. Right? This is a plan that's not temporary because we're temporary. It's permanent because we're temporary, and we want to move along. So this is the danger statement for Kim and her family. DCF, Donna, Ann, and the treatment team at the hospital, notice not Kim, are worried that Kim might use heroin again when she's caring for Paul, the nexus. We don't care if she uses, we do, but for practical purposes, we care most when she's caring for Paul, and that she might not be able to take care of him, that he could see her and get scared, emotional piece, or that he could get seriously hurt without her supervision. So we're looking at emotional and physical safety here in that statement. Separate from that, DCF, Kim, Donna, and Ann and the treatment team at the hospital, so that's everybody's worried, that Kim may continue to struggle to find a job, that she may get depressed, and she may start using drugs again, and that Paul could get scared or seriously hurt. Right? Kim harped with her social worker on the fact that if she just hadn't lost her job, she'd still be clean. Right? Now, we have to believe that because it's Kim's experience, and we need Kim to get that even if she loses her job, we don't want her to go through this cycle again, right? We want her to have a plan that's going to keep her safely parenting Paul, even if she loses her job in the future. Jobs can come and go. So we want to acknowledge that that's a worry for us and make sure part of our plan addresses it. Does that make sense? Kim, Donna, Ann, and Paul, that's all the family people, not the professionals, are worried that DCF won't see all the good things Kim is doing and has done, and that they might not be willing to have Paul come back and live with her. Yes?
It's the best, because I think that's kind of a key thing that I see. So it's the best way to help clients shift away from sort of that I'm a victim or, you know, I mean, that kind of mentality, or it's not my fault. That's so hard to...
And that's really common with a lot of our cases, isn't it? Where there's some external factor that they're blaming, right, that gets in the way of their best parenting. I think as long as they're able to see that we have both things listed, we can slowly move them there. Sometimes we get stuck until mom admits that it's not having a job, we're not closing the case. So what we're trying to do is go ahead and forward with the creating a network and planning, and that through that process of taking new steps, her insight's going to change. So instead of assuming insight has to become before action, if she just changes her actions, she might get some new insight. See, we're reversing that. And for us, tick, 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 we have a federal clock that is ticking, right, that tells us we have to get this family to a different place in order to avoid a termination of parental rights. And what we're telling the families is it's not our job to get you there, it's your job. And we're going to back you 100%, but that we need to see you take immediate action in order to do that. And we literally walk around the conflict around our insight and the philosophical piece where we wish that they would admit. Does it always work? No, nothing always works. Because if we had a magic bullet, wow, well, hey, right, we'd be out of business. But we don't. So what needs to happen next? Yeah.
So what's been difficult in some of the signs of safety meetings that I've done is trying to wrap our head around harm and danger statement. And what I'm seeing here is that you've wrapped the harm into it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, you know, the idea of coming with a danger statement to the meeting so that the social worker is primed with, you know, the specifics.
Yep.
And but then continuing to be collaborative with the family in developing the statement.
I think it's a beautiful way to do it. If you're going to have an internal staffing first, which a lot of folks do, bringing that to the table, and instead of saying, it's kind of like a case plan, hey, I just developed this on my computer and I just need you to read it and sign it, right? That's a very different experience than I have a blank piece of paper and I'm going to sit down with a mom and we're going to co-create it together. Even if I've thought my way through it prior, so we've done an internal mapping and at a staffing and I know what the danger is versus the safety like in my own head, instead of saying, hey mom, we did this without you, because that's the implication. We don't say that, but that's the implication, that she walks away feeling like, well, when was that, and who was there, and what was said, what was written down. It says we are thinking our way through what we're worried about, what's working well, and we start with their perspective. What are you most worried about, right? And then we can value add to it and make sure that our statement reads in the both and setting, both our worries and the worries of the family. Does that make sense? Because I think that some counties were talking about how do we really try to do this with more families. And some folks, the complexity of the case matters, right? So there's 6 kids. It's a huge family. All their generations have been involved with CPS. They worry us the most. It's keeping me up at night. That might be a family you bring in and you have someone like Chelsea or yourself facilitate the meeting. Other cases, the social worker feels confident going out and doing it in the home, right? It's less complex. Maybe there's fewer players, or they're a family that's fairly new to us, and we don't have the same level of worry. But being able to make sure both perspectives are captured is important. And this process in and of itself makes the what needs to happen come a little bit more smoothly, right? So we've already got a little bit more buy-in, and we've also seen the families, it just de-escalates, right? So there's one case at home where this dad, he's the worst of the worst, you know, he's so angry, and he's holding a grudge for his case being opened 4 years ago, something an investigator said or did when they went out, and then another time fairly recently. So he had his case open with his biological kids, and now he's remarried, and it's his wife's kids. And so it's like this guy, everywhere he goes, he's getting involved with CPS. And he's so angry that all he talks about, every phone call he makes, every home visit that there is, every meeting he comes to, is how angry he is about this. He can't talk about the current situation. He can't talk about the risky behaviors that his teenage girls are taking now. He can't talk about the situation between him and his wife and the violence that his kids have witnessed. But he is all about screaming and yelling about the anger. So by taking him through this process, I parking lotted his anger issues, asked him to stay focused on the current situation and the future goals, and to, quote, humor me to go through this process. And we had very strong group agreements about what that was going to look like. Social worker couldn't believe it. He's got through 2 meetings so far. And yes, I've had to redirect him 6 times, but he's not calling the director every day anymore. Wonder what that's about. He's feeling heard, and it's got written down that he was heard, and it's starting to minimize. One of the rules, or one of the safety goals, is that he doesn't suck us into his marital conflict. He calls the worker every day to whine about what his wife is or isn't doing. The wife calls every other day to say how he's contributing to what she is or isn't doing. That's not helpful when we're trying to figure out how we got one kid on the run, one with these at-risk behaviors and smoking and drinking and going to boys' houses, another one that grandma harbors. Like, so you name it, we got all these other things to be focused on. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, have you ever seen this process work with a set of parents who are no longer together, and there's a long history of DV, and there's now no contact order?
We do. Thank you. Yes, thank you, because that's a lot of our families, isn't it? So the cases where we've done that, we've had 2 parallel meetings where we have meetings with dad separately and meetings with mom separately. In one case, the attorneys all were present, and they asked mom and dad to come to the same table to pretend like it was like they were in court. So we kind of waived the no contact for them to all be in the same room. Supervisor said to me, Heather, I will bet the farm and every ounce of furniture in my farmhouse that this dad, in particular the dad, cannot sit through this meeting. He will walk out. And I said, are you serious about that bet? Because I could use a new farmhouse. And he said, I'm telling you. And we got this couple through this meeting. And the main focus is the facilitated process, the rigor in the facilitation, and then most importantly, so what? So what are we going to do so that your son, who dad currently had custody of, mom was like homeless and bouncing through shelters, and this little boy is just trying to get up and go to school every day. He's 10. And they had a photograph, an 8x10 photo of him that they set in the center of the table. And you know, that practice can really be effective when people lose their focus very quickly, right? So it's can't fight with each other, and instead it's about both of you have in common that you want your son to be safe and raised in a healthy environment. So we do parallel meetings where there's parallel parenting. We bring them together when there's co-parenting. But you always have to do a safety check. When you're talking about domestic violence, it is critical that we get a current assessment of who's worried about what threats. Is there anything that might make them have future risk for themselves? A mother, for example, in this case where a father had been abusive to her, does she have any fear that this meeting could contribute to her being unsafe in the future? And making sure that we're not having them communicate together at the same table if that's the case. In some cases, mom didn't even want dad to know we were having any such meeting and that she was even cooperating with the agency because that would send him over the edge. So you have to pick and choose and really think your way through that clinically. But what we wanted them to do is each create the list of people in their network, and then from there, what the plan would be. So in this case, their initial conversation about what needs to happen is here. Then I'm going to take you through the network building exercise that they did and how that worked out, and then what was the final plan that they came up with. So just to kind of wet your whistle, this plan states that Donna, Ann, Kim's therapist, Sam, all agree that they'll be part of Kim and Paul's safety network. You got to name who's going to be involved to help make this work. Kim will begin supervised visits with Paul at Donna's home, with either Donna or Ann always there at the same time. Wow. The supervised visits are going to be at Donna's house. Who's not supervising the visit? You, the worker. How cool would that be? Not every case would we have that kind of relationship with the extended family, but sometimes we haven't even explored it as an option. So this is just asking us to think about, can we in this case explore that as an option? And if so, what would it have to look like? And here it says, Donna and Ann will cancel a visit and call DCF if for any reason they're worried about Kim using drugs again. If we stopped right there, that leaves a lot open for interpretation. What does Kim look like different than your other clients when she's using drugs, right? So we want to get crystal clear about what to look for. Reasons for canceling the visit can include if Kim has slurred speech, if she's having trouble standing, or if, quote, she's just acting stupid. That's her son's way to describe what's mommy like when she's using drugs. Oh, she just acts stupid. So it's an inside joke with the family, and we captured their language. But we know that if she's slurring her speech or having trouble standing, those are the first two indicators that she's high. And so everybody looks different when they're high, and we want to be clear about each family what that means. Now, we can trust Donna and Ann to know that because they're her family. They've seen her high on and off for 15 years. We haven't known her that long. This makes us feel confident that Donna and Ann are going to be the first to know, even before I might, that she's high. In a different circumstance where the family members are oblivious to that, that would be an issue, right? Kim will continue to meet with Sam, that's her therapist. Sam's going to call both DCF and Donna if he's worried that she's using again or if she's not coming in for an appointment. I'd push that too, and I'd want to know, what is he doing? Therapeutically, what are his goals with her, and do they align with what our worries are up here around the depression piece, around her ability to caregive when she's struggling, how to ask for help, things like that. Another thing that we've asked Sam to do, who's the therapist, PS, and not the social worker, is to do words and pictures with Kim. Has anybody heard of the words and pictures activity in Signs of Safety? I didn't think so. It's a really cool way in which, you know how 3 houses is the way that we collect information from the kid and share it with the parent? Words and pictures allows the parent to write a story about why you got involved with DCF and why you're in care in an age-appropriate way, and then the kid can draw pictures to illustrate it. And that 10-year-old Paul isn't blaming himself anymore. Mom's taking the responsibility and sharing what it is that happened. And so it would be, once upon a time, and da-da-da-da-da, the date, Mommy had a bouncing baby boy, and his name was Paul. And this and this and this was good, and this is what was happening in our life. And then one day, Mommy got depressed. And when Mommy got depressed, she used heroin. And heroin makes her act stupid, whatever it is, right? And Mommy wasn't able to care for Paul's needs. And the day that she used while cooking dinner, the police had to come, the fire department had to come, and Paul went to be safe and live with Donna and Ann. Mommy's working very, very hard to do everything she needs to do to make sure Paul can come home. Like, that's the kind of, it's literally like a book, maybe 8-10 pages long, you know, depending on the situation, that just puts it into very simplistic, age-appropriate, developmentally, you know, appropriate terms that gives Paul, from his mom's perspective, the story so that she's telling him directly and he gets a sense of that. So that's something she can be really proactive in therapy, using that time so that there's a therapeutic benefit for Paul. Then DCF will refer Kim for a job placement program, right? That's us acknowledging her worry that she needs to have a job. And we want her to have a job. We want her to be able to provide for her family so that her sister isn't helping out. Kim agrees to start going to NA again, and DCF, Kim, and the safety network agree to review this plan again in 4 weeks. That's really, really key. Because if you think about this, we need to see this tested. We need to know that it's actually going to be working. And if we get to the point where Paul goes home, we're going to have to rewrite the plan to look differently when Paul's in her care all the time. Make sense to folks? So it's kind of a staged process. But really what this does is says we've got a really clear on-the-ground plan for what needs to happen for this phase of time. And we're going to check in every 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 2 weeks, depending on the severity and the complicating stuff in the case. And that we may need to add more people to the network. So that's the piece I want to move on to, is how do you get this network of people together, especially when the family's first conversation with you is, I have no one, right? How many have heard that? And being then able to say, what do we do with this network when we get them together, and what does our expectation of them look like? Yes?
Maybe a copy of that we can link, since
Yes.
we can't see that.
I have it in the car. Thank you for reminding me. I have a one-page front and back for you, so I'm just going to make a note. And then map, 1 page. No problem. Okay, so when we do a network meeting with a family, we use a dialogue structure. And this allows us to make sure we're paying attention not just to what we're talking about, but how we're talking about it. Process really, really matters. So getting clear purpose, why are we meeting today? What's the context in which we're meeting? What might pull our attention away? I could ask any of you right now, wow, you're in training for 2 hours in the middle of the day. What might be distracting you at this time from being fully present here, right? The inbox filling up, the pile of paper on your desk, right? Your tab's got all this stuff to do. That's reality. And families, when they come to our table, have their own reality of distractions as well. By taking a moment to acknowledge it, people actually kind of let it go for a little bit and can be even more focused. Making sure we have solid group agreements. Making sure that we have a plan for someone to uphold us to those agreements. Maybe it's the facilitator at first, but you want everyone to take shared responsibility for the success of the meeting. Whether you're the leader in the room, whether you're a family member in the room, whether you're a worker in the room, everybody has to contribute to this successful process of the meeting, right? Families need to be clear about why they're there, so they're also clear about why they're not there. If they think they're coming in for a plan for their kid to come home and you're just doing mapping today, they need to be clear about that up front so that there's no setup. Making sure that all the right people are at the table who should be, and if not, we're going to have another meeting to get those people there. What are our desired outcomes? What are we going to walk away from this particular time together with? A plan, a decision, a list, an idea, all those solutions, right? Desired outcomes should be nouns and should be really specific so that we can measure at the end, did we do what we said we were going to do? So in this case, if it's mapping, it could literally be organizing what we're worried about and what's working well, and then consolidating it into a clear harm and danger statement and a safety goal statement. And that's the content. What are you actually doing in that meeting? The next steps about what do we got to do following this meeting and who's going to do what by when. And then what we call the plus delta. Pluses are what was a success. This is the feedback. What was helpful, what was a strength, what should we do more of. And the delta is the Greek sign for change. What do we need to change or upgrade when we meet again next time? And if there's any deltas listed, you start your next meeting with this is how we addressed your deltas, and so that they feel that they were heard and respected. This is how we're using for all meetings in our agency now. Every internal meeting, supervision, staff meetings, unit meetings, training, and then all the meetings that we're having with families. So foster care review is using this. All of our clinical review teams are using this. Every single meeting we have is now structured in a way that helps us feel more efficient, more productive, more focused, and that everybody's feeling like, yes, we're getting the task done, but the relationships at the table are being respected in the process, and that we're having less kind of friction because people didn't get a chance to say, I was here for 2 hours, and I thought we were here for one reason, and apparently you thought we were here for another reason. Have you ever had that meeting where you walk out of a meeting and you weren't sure why you're in the meeting? This cuts down on that. Just a recommendation. So I'm going to go back out of this and get to the actual network circles. And this offers a great tool for us to be able to think about bringing these folks together in a really concrete way. So there's that thing again. All right, so the goal is to remind families that our involvement is temporary and that we're using our skillful use of our authority to say to them, we have to have a network of permanent people in your life, people who are going to be there for the long haul. And by the way, when you say that to a family, who would you bring to this table who's going to support your family forever? They're less likely to bring other fellow clients to the table than not. They might still, that might be all that they have for now. But generally speaking, that decreases the toxic people from coming to the table because at some level they know it's not going to be forever. They're also less likely to bring people to the table who are the ones who call them to want to use drugs, right? So the people who are actually protecting them and hope to deter them from using drugs are more likely the people they bring to the table. And what the key thing is we want to know who have they already told all their problems to and the truth about their involvement with CPS. That's going to be key. Who knows how much information about their involvement and what their struggles are. So this is the actual tool itself. You can draw it on a piece of paper. You don't need to have a form. And there's 3 tiers of people that we want to figure out who these folks are. So the child is the center of our focus. That's how we get these people to come to the table. So let's say mom's estranged from a sibling and she says, oh yeah, my brother will never come. Well, does your brother care about your son? Well, yeah, of course he does. Well, would you mind if I had a conversation? If you've asked your brother and he said no, would you mind if I had a conversation with your brother to talk about what Paul's needs are? And then that's a window into Paul getting reconnected with his uncle. Make sense? We always rely on the fact that everybody has a connection to the kid and wants to see the kid be safe and do well. Most people are willing to come forward, even if there's a major rift with the adults, just to hear out what the situation is. So we got to find out in the first tier, people who know everything about the CPS involvement, people who know a little bit is the second tier, and people who know nothing but they're in their life every day. Who are those folks? And we want to build a safety network of people who are really pragmatic in their life. The grandmother, the sister, the next door neighbor, the best friend, the aunt, a work friend. Who are these people that we otherwise wouldn't have access to? Right? We're always in contact with the professionals that are in their life, but pretty rarely do we get to know at an intimate level the people who are in their life because it's their choice, not because it's their job. So when you think about your own reliance on people for support, who do you call? Who do you reach out to when you're stressed out? Who do you call when you're stressed?
And good friend.
Good friend? Family? Who else? Who do you call?
Family.
Yeah, who do you call? Who do you call? Yeah, no one said the local child protection social worker, right? It's not the first that comes to your mind, right? That's a very last resort. So how do we help our families who are so isolated that they need a child protection social worker to figure out how to build supports with people who are going to be in their life for the long haul? And how do we help those people know how to help them? That's the key, because we can find out right away, are these relationships healthy? Are they toxic? Are they relationships that really do steer them in the right path? Do they have a concrete understanding of what kind of worries we have as an agency? So now they're looking at the family through a different lens. They're thinking about their sister and her son differently, right? So how can you see family safety circles benefiting through different parts of your casework practice? What do you think would benefit you guys?
I mean, it would be nice to have, for the clients to have other people that they're always, asking and getting help from instead of you being
The sole
the
person.
sole person to solve all their problems. Plus, it's kind of, it's not healthy for them to believe that we can do that, or
That's
that,
right.
they need to know that they're in charge of that. And I think many times they attribute, the social worker, everything else, and although that may make you feel good, that's really not what you want.
Well, no, it builds dependency instead of healthy
Exactly.
interdependence with their community, right? So if Hotline were to ask, geez, is there anyone? And you even just get one name at that point, and then you get it after it's gone through emergency response or an investigation, or you're kind of getting it in this phase, right? And you've already got some snippets of information to build on. You know who to pull to the table more than you would have otherwise. It's setting you up for the next step. And it gives folks at each part of the casework process concrete people that they can bring together. And we can know, did those people work up till now, or did they not? And we need to get different people. Or do certain people want to be part of the family's life, but they can't make a commitment to watch a kid every day after school? They can drive mom to some appointments every other week, but they are not going to be that one who's there daily, right? So that helps us learn who has what capacity to support in what really realistic ways that we might need. So back to Kim and Paul. We know our worries about Kim. This is exactly the same. And what's working well. And we did the mapping and we came up with the safety and danger statement. We got to find out who are the people, and we got to know, what is their relationship like with Kim and Paul? Do they get along with them, or is there friction? We want to know if they have regular contact, or is this someone who sees them once a year? We need to know it's people who see them daily, weekly, monthly, right? We don't want it to be someone who's so removed. We want to know, where do they see him? Do they see him in the home setting, or do they see him in the community? How long have they known him? Do they know Kim and Paul's family, or just Kim and Paul in isolation, right? Do you live near Kim? Why is that one helpful? Yeah. Do you share a wall with Kim and the apartments are next to each other? Ooh, that could be really helpful for us, right? So if there's a neighbor who really hears and sees what's going on, we want to know that neighbor, right? To what extent are you willing and able to help Kim if she needs it? That's the key. Right? So at a minimum, they hear our worries and they're aware, but they can't make a commitment and they back out. Others will make a small kind of a commitment. Maybe it's time limited, or maybe the type of action they can take is limited, or they're in it, they're moving in. I mean, we had a shaken baby, or an unexplained infant injury case in Boston where her parents moved from Wisconsin to Boston, got an apartment, and said, we want to be here through this process. And by the end of it, they realized if they moved in with their daughter moved in with them, this baby could come home to her. Because deep down they thought it was the dad, or something the dad did or didn't do, because the baby was in his care solely when the ER visit happened and somebody filed a report. So it really made them realize that if we have 24-hour supervision, and we met the grandparents, and we met the extended family, and we met their neighbors and their friends, and everybody was committed to it, and the parents were committed to their own parents being there, and that the grandparents would call the social worker if any part of the plan or any rules were potentially going to be broken, or something did get broken. Everybody agreed to it, and it's actually still implemented and working. There's 2 cases in Massachusetts that I know of where they've done that. They've implemented a plan with a network with a very, very high-risk case, and the courts were on board with it. The attorneys were on board with it. So if everyone comes to the table and they're on board, we can go forward with it. But we have to know what level of commitment. Taking the network through an open, narrow, closed process is basically what we're doing from a facilitator's perspective. The open-ended questions you ask as a social worker is the open. What are we worried about? What's working well? What needs to happen? We narrow them in the mapping phase, and in this case, we got to narrow who are the people who know everything, know something, and know nothing. And then of those people, who can be moved to the inner circle that aren't already there? The people in the inner circle who know everything and understand all of our worries, are they capable of being safe people? And are they people that we want to be in the network? And then lastly, who's officially going to be in the network? And then the what and how of the safety planning comes next as a group. So that whole dialogue structure, right? We don't have to use the jargon words like purpose and desired outcomes. That's for us. It's the questions that we ask to the family that really matter, right? And so why are you here today? If you're doing the Network Circles activity, it's to identify people who are able to help you ensure that Paul will always be safe. Very simple. So less is more in this model. How do we want to work together? Stay committed to what's best for Paul, and just be honest with each other. Who else would be helpful to have in the meeting? Let's generate a list of these people who could be in your network. That's when you do the open with the 3 questions. And then how can we approach them to see if they can be in this network, right? So is Kim able to read the danger statement and the safety goal statement out loud to these people, right? Has she reached a place where she's in agreement with us about why she's involved? And this process can take place over a couple of weeks, right? So you map 1 week, and then maybe a week or two later you come back and you do, you know, the 3 houses maybe you've done with the kids, and you report back and you finish that, add that to the mapping. Then you do the safety network meeting and you do the circles. And then now you want to bring the network people together. So by your 4th meeting, you're looking at safety planning with a network of people and wanting to make sure that everybody's clear about the expectation and what they need to do. So being able to then take them through the process, you want to start with what do you ask to find out who's in the inner circle. So in your handout, you have the little script, what do you ask and what do you do down below. So you ask, who are the people in your life, in your child's life, who already know what's happened that led to your child or children being in care or CPS being involved with their family. So you can use it with any kind of case that you have in any kind of, any place in the casework process. And as they're sharing who these people are, you're writing the names of the people in the inner circle. And you want to make sure that that center has the kid, maybe draw a picture of the kid. You can get creative, tape a picture of the kid, doesn't matter, you know. And that's getting the inner circle. Please note that at this point, it's an open brainstorming. So as they're rambling off names that make you cringe because you know them, or you know they have a Corey record, or they're dangerous people, don't stress, we're writing down everyone's name. And we're not asking them yet, what did you tell them, right? So we don't want to get sucked into that place yet. We just want to get the list of names and who they are to her and her child. Giving compliments along the way helps get more names. So if she starts to mention a few people in the inner circle, but she's struggling to come up with more, pausing for a moment to compliment her for her openness and courage that's been shown to date. So I imagine that must have been really hard for you to tell your mom the whole story about us being involved. How did you do that? What led you to the courage to do that? And so that gives a moment of pause where you're appreciating how hard this must be for the family, right? And then therefore, hopefully they're going to continue to start brainstorming further and then give you people in the middle circle. Who are the people in your life and the kids' lives who know a little bit about what's happened, who don't know the whole story but maybe know some of it, or maybe they know that something happened but they don't know any of the details, right? So if the neighbor saw the flashing lights and heard the sirens in the middle of the night, saw CPS emergency worker come and pull the kid, but they have no idea what the details were, that would be somebody who could be in the middle circle, right? Or it could be someone who maybe she said, yeah, my kid's living at my sister's, but that's all they know, they don't know why, right? So this is helping them figure out who are those people who are in their life regularly who maybe have some information. Could be the therapist. How many of your clients don't tell everything to their own therapist? Most of them, right? So this is helping them get really realistic about who have they really told everything to versus just some things to. And then the outer circle, who are the people in your life or kids' lives who don't know anything about what's happened? Maybe it's the school teacher. Maybe it's someone they carpool. Maybe it's the coach of the sports team the kid's on. Maybe it's the people she works with, right? So we're getting a list of people. Maybe it's extended family members, and we're going to identify them in the outer circle. So this is the kicker. You get everybody listed, and you're trying to figure out what if there aren't sufficient people listed in the inner circle that in your mind already you think there's going to be some tasks that this family has to do, and there's not enough people yet. Maybe we need some additional people who are in the the middle circle or the outer circle that we want to move in. So it's helping them understand that we are going to start thinking about how do we know when we have enough people? Because enough is going to be defined differently for each case, right? Some families, you just need 1 or 2 people to kind of beef them up a little bit. Others have to have a laundry list of people because there's so many things to do. So making sure that we have a conversation about moving them and how we do that is important. So who else from these outer circles do you think needs to be part of the inner circle is a great place to start. Is there anyone in these 2 outer circles you have thought about telling or come close to telling, but you haven't quite gotten there yet? Right, so appeal on their desire to do this anyway. Who would grandma, let's say grandma's already identified in the inner circle and she's a safe person, say needs to be in the inner circle with her, right? Who's grandma going to need to have support her, help support you? Who would the kids want to have in this inner circle? For Kim, who does Paul think is a safe person in his life? And when he says his Uncle Steve, who's her brother, who she's estranged from, she has to think differently about whether she's going to let Paul into the Steve into the inner circle, right? Who's going to help the child the most? Hey, you know all these people. I haven't met any of them yet. Who do you think I'm going to want to see as your social worker in the inner circle? They start thinking through our lens. Oh, well, I guess you're probably going to want the therapist, or I guess you're probably going to want my neighbor since they live next door. And then you start thinking better about moving people around. And then who of all these people do you feel most comfortable with, most understood by, and think would be most important to have us have part of the safety network? So it really is helping them think about, you know what you need to get through this. Who do you want to make sure is there to help you? And then we have to circle the safe people. Just because they're in a circle, which by definition means they know all the details, does not automatically imply that they're safe people. So that's when we have to have the nitty-gritty discussion about who's really going to be able to realistically provide support, skills, access, a car, whatever it is that they need, right? And we want to make sure that we're clear about who's safe versus who would we never want to have be in the network. So you can be in the inner circle, but you're not necessarily part of the network unless you're safe. And wanting to make sure that we have clarity from those people, right? We've asked her about how long she's known those people, and we want to, or vice versa. We want to know both parties' perspectives, right? So from her perspective, how long has she known this person? On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that this person will be able to help you, right? So in this case of Kim, her friend Melanie was supposed to come to the meeting to do this activity, and Melanie no-showed for the meeting. So the worker said, wow, Melanie's like your best friend. And she said, yeah, she's a close friend. You know, Jenny's really my best friend, but you know, Melanie's close. Well, what makes you think that Melanie would be reliable in your network if she wasn't able to make this meeting and she didn't call you to tell you why today? You know, Melanie does that a lot. Melanie was going to go to court with me last time and she didn't show for that either. Oh, okay, we're seeing a pattern with Melanie. How about Melanie's still your friend, but she's not going to be part of this network? See the difference? Making sure we're clear that they spend enough time together, that it's not someone she only sees once a year. And the last question, what if everything was working the way you hope that it will? What role would this person play in your success? So really helping her think specifically about how each person might be able to help and support her in a way that meets the child protection worries. We've got to mitigate those dangers. So being able to make sure that we get the people identified as the first step. Figuring out what they actually know from her is the second step. This is the part where you say, now what exactly have you told your mom versus what maybe you told your brother versus what maybe you told your friend, right? So we want to know what she told, because she could have easily misrepresented, right, why she's involved, blaming external factors, right, twisting around information that might not be an accurate reflection. So we're going to say, hey, remember that danger statement that we came up with? That's what you need to share with them if you haven't done that already. Some families have already given some version of that, and it's going to match, and it's not going to be a big deal. Many of our families have not said exactly the same thing, right? Or they, like us, use the word suicide attempt instead of saying turn the gas on the stove at home when, you know what I mean, when the kids were there. So we want to help them understand that the bottom line for safety, right, is not changed. We hold the bottom line, it doesn't move. We have to see certain things in place in order to feel comfortable either returning a child home or safely closing the case. And that the network people have to know our view, not just mom's perspective. They have to get the agency and the professional's perspective about what's happened in the past and understand the worries that professionals have about what might happen in the future. And that's the key, that we have to convince the parent that this is what they need to know and that we don't want them to hear it from us. They're their people. We want them to hear it from them as a parent. So they have to take responsibility for sharing that information with all the potential people for the safety network prior to the first meeting. When you call up to invite all these people, that's what we want you to share with them. So when they come to the table, we know we're all starting on the same playing field. Questions about that? Does it make sense? Okay.
So what happens
family that after all this, they say, there's nobody for me. There's just nobody for me.
We
I
haven't
don't know
had
who
that.
to
We
get.
literally haven't had that happen yet. I mean, you guys, I'm not even kidding you. The average American family has over 200 adults in its family system over the age of 21, on average. So it's reminding them who they've shut out of their life, who they've been estranged from because of their behavior, who they've chosen to alienate themselves from, and getting them there. Now, proximity can be an issue. We had one family where their closest family members were states away or in Mexico. Excuse me. So we had to have a conversation about, are we going to have people join by conference call? Who can join in person? Is people willing to fly here? And that has happened in some circumstances. The couple with the parents in Wisconsin, we waited till their family could come out from Wisconsin. Paternal, dad's side of the family came as well. And it was really helpful because they hadn't met each other. The couple hadn't been together, I think it had been like 6 years, and because they lived so far away, they hadn't met yet. So being able to get somebody at the table, there's a great Minnesota case, I think it was Carver County, where the mom literally said, we just moved here. We relocated, we literally have no one here. And they said, well, you better find some people. She literally went knocking on doors. She went to her church and asked people in her church. She had to go to the neighbors and get somebody who lived next door. So can you imagine? Like, it's not, hi, I'm new to the neighborhood, here's a cake, coffee cake. It's, hi, I'm new to the neighborhood, I need someone to help me protect my kids. But they actually set her up to do that, and she did it. And there's a great interview with her talking about it and how, like, she can't even believe it, you know, and that she was in a place where she said, I was going to move away. The first thing I said was, yeah, well, I'm going to move to another county, and you're not going to be able to find me. And instead, she's grateful that she stayed in that county because that county took the time to help her build a network. She's all these people now. She has all these friends and all these people who care about her situation, and she's so far past her child protection intervention that was a couple years ago. So being able to think about, you know, how we sell this, if you will, to ourselves and to the family is a key part of adopting this practice over time. Okay, so how many people is enough people? Different with every case, right? But what we know is the number of people is determined based on the seriousness, the nature of the case, right? The concerns, the age and vulnerability of the children, and the availability of other people in the safety network. If there are 10 people who are barely available, we need to get 11, 12, and 13 who are really available, right? So it's that kind of thinking, that we're making sure that there's enough people to do the day-to-day arrangements that are required. And it just depends on the circumstances. Is it mom's discipline techniques that we're worried about? Is it supervision of the kids? Is it substance abuse and caring for the kids while she's under the influence? Or is it domestic violence, right, where the people in the home are fighting physically and verbally and the kids are getting caught in the crossfire? Those are going to uniquely contribute to how we shape the duties, if you will, of the network. So when they say how many's enough, we say, well, it depends. And your answer should always be, it depends, right? Because if we give them one answer and then that works out to not be enough, we've set ourselves up for failure. So we always want to say, it depends. So at a minimum, the first thing they have to do is listen to our views. Come to the table and just hear us out. That's the only thing we're asking of the very first meeting. Once those folks are there, we want them and say, yep, we're going to help, we're going to contribute in whatever way we can. They need to come to meetings with the parents, with ourselves, to develop a detailed safety plan. And that's going to demonstrate that everybody's going to be able to help keep these kids safe. And the number of meetings to get this done could be 1 or 2, or it could be a dozen. It just depends on the case. Most of the time, it can be done in a relatively short period of time, 1 or 2 meetings. Are your meetings 20 minutes or are they 2 hours? They can be anything in between, right? But it's going to be based on how much time it takes for people to really get specific about what's going to mitigate the danger, right? So we'll get to the example of Kim and Paul. Once they get a plan, they have to get together and monitor that the plan's working. And it could take 6 months up to 2 years for us to feel confident that the plan's working enough to pull out, depending on how high risk that case was. And we need to make sure that this group of people has agreed to report back to us if they think the plan isn't working. So with the little stuff, we want them to intervene for themselves. We want the network people to say to mom, hey, I notice X, Y, and Z is happening, that's against the plan. What can I do to support you? And if mom responds, fantastic. the second mom doesn't respond to the intervention that the network has devised, we want to get a call, right? So it becomes preventative, and that Paul, the child, is not going to get hurt in order for us to re-intervene at that point in time. And then they continue to support the family long after we're gone. Some of those safety network members are going to drop out at that point because they're going to be burnt to a crisp. They're going to feel like you do. They don't want to help this family because it's sucking them dry, right? So they're going to want to bail. And we have to be ready for that. So right from the get-go, who's going to be backup? What's plan B? If your aunt takes you to therapy every week and she has a conflict this week, how do you not skip therapy? Who's the person who's willing to take her when Aunt Eve can't do it? Oh, okay, your brother will, you know what I'm saying? So you have to make sure that we're transparently identifying what are the contingency plans that we need to consider and who's going to make the commitment to do it. So that when it arises, they've already talked about it and they're not calling you because they didn't think of it. It's one less phone call you will get as a social worker. So here's the actual plan, network circles that Kim and Paul had. So there's Paul in the middle, and they've got all these people identified. So it turns out we have Donna and Ann. We're not surprised because the sister and her wife have been the kinship care providers. We have her parents, Paul and Maria. And Kim says they know everything, but Maria, her mother, is so judgmental. Maria doesn't get addiction. You went through treatment. You should be cured. What's the problem? Right? So Maria's not always that supportive. But her sister, Eve, who's Kim's aunt, is somebody who she really appreciates talking to. Eve listens and is supportive, and one day at a time, honey, and today's a new day, and you're going to do fine, and we know you love Paul, and that's right, get your services, and you're going to be able to stay clean and sober. You can call me if you ever want to talk. Very different relationship between mom and her aunt than her own mother. Melanie's the friend who no-showed for the meeting. Notice she's in the inner circle because she tells her everything, but she's not circled as part of the network because she's not reliable. Jenny, who's her best friend, is reliable and knows everything. We'd like to keep Jenny involved. Steve, Kim's brother, is in the middle circle. Now the funny part is Donna and her parents have kept Steve in the loop. Technically, he knows everything. Kim just doesn't know they've told him everything. So he could be in the inner circle, but to save the family dynamic issue, we put him out here. Steve's the one, when she was asked the question by her worker, who would Paul want to have in the inner circle with you? Uncle Steve. Uncle Steve's married with kids, and he used to spend a lot of time with Paul. Take him to the zoo, go out on family fun day activities, to the beach, whatever. So Steve then comes back in. Well, what if I don't want to talk to Steve? Hey, you know what? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but if Steve can help contribute to Paul's well-being, you're cool with Paul and Steve getting together? Yeah, okay, that's fine. Sarah's the next door neighbor who shares a wall. Their apartments are right next to each other. Sarah didn't know the details, but she knew the police showed up in the middle of the night. So she was kind of scared. Kim was like, geez, I mean, I know Sarah knows something's up, but I don't think she knows what, and I don't think Sarah knows that I have a heroin addiction. Okay, well, are you willing to call her and tell her and share the danger statement and the safety goal and help her, understand that with her help, Paul might get to come home? And she did. And Sarah was like, are you kidding me? Anything to help a kid, I'd be happy to help. You know, Kim and I have been sort of friendly, help each other carry our groceries in. Like they had enough of a relationship that felt positive enough for Sarah to get involved at some level.
What would happen now if it was a different kind of situation and that this really became antagonistic? You know, you disclose something like that with a neighbor, and now
the neighbor's like, I don't want to live by you and be your neighbor
it's
anymore.
like, oh, you burn the house down, you're doing heroin.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that, to me, has some issues.
It does. And so in the event that that happens, we have to cross that bridge if and when we come to it. And we hope to help them think their way through that before they even ask, right? So she felt the probability of Sarah, we scaled the question with her. What do you think Sarah's willingness, confidence, and capacity will be to help you? She rated them all high. Great. Now, there are other people who did not get rated high, who are not asked to be involved and are not circled. So we're mindful of assessing somebody's safety, like how safe would they be, and how much more likely are they going to be to actually help and do what we hope that they'll do. So each case is different. Another big thing is each of these people that are circled, we need to sign a release of information so we can have two-way communication with them. So everybody signs releases at the meeting, and we're clear about what their role is. And that's what's on the side, is just what's their role in connection to Paul and Kim. You know, just a quick and dirty jot down of that. And it's not about what they'll do, it's about their role and how they know or are connected to them. And then the what needs to happen, right, is her asking each potential member, and it's potential member until they're a member. It's voluntary, they get to choose. And then scheduling a time and a date to hold that first meeting. Once you get them to the meeting and people are starting to commit and figure out that they're going to be part of the safety planning, you want to schedule multiple meeting dates out. If you know it's going to take like 2 more meetings or maybe 3 more meetings, put 3 dates on the calendar, like maybe 1 to 2 weeks apart. And then if they no-show or blow off, you have another meeting date already scheduled, and the expectation is they're all just going to come, so that you're not scrambling with your calendars, trying to find time or cancel something else. Does that make sense? Right, so it allows you to plan ahead to be most efficient. And that did happen, that case with that really angry dad, where he and mom had a huge blowout fight. He left the home because he didn't want to physically get into an altercation, but he remembered the next day, we have a safety mapping meeting at the department. He came to her door and said, hey, we got that meeting, are we going? And she was selling his belongings out of the back of the house. So, as you can imagine, it escalated to a really bad place. There was an altercation, the police were called, and nobody was going anywhere to meet with anybody about safety mapping that day. So worker calls me and says, get a load of this. Can we reschedule? And I said, we don't have to. We have the meeting next week on the 21st. It's all set. Tell them that they need to work out this crisis, and when everything's de-escalated, we're coming back to the table at the date that we had planned, and for them to still bring the 7 or 8 people that they had said they would bring. So it was her reminding them about the calls they were going to make, about reading the danger statement to them, and bringing them to the table. They did come to the next meeting. No, they blew off the next meeting. They confirmed it on Friday for a Monday meeting with the director, who they call daily anyway. And the director's like, please don't make me come into to this meeting. I talked to this family enough. But that next Monday, they just forgot. And so we had the 3rd date, and they brought the people to the meeting. Not all of them, but some of them. And then we went ahead and scheduled 2 additional dates from there. So we would have been done by then, which the supervisor reminded Dad. Do you understand when you suck us into your marital junk and you can't do what you say you're going to do? Look how much time that's going by. Your case could have been closed by now had you been able to just kind of keep it going. And it made him think about, wow, maybe I am contributing in a way that isn't helpful. Like, he can't get out of his own way. And he was able to say, okay, I get it. I need to not call you to whine about her, and she needs to not call you to whine about me. And they had that agreement right there at the table. I can't wait to get back. This is last week. I can't wait to get back and find out, did it actually happen or not? And everything they were proposing that they wanted to do, she's like, I'm just going to tell you right now, I really don't think my manager's going to buy into that, but we're going to see. So, you know, there are sometimes those moments too when something that they're proposing just doesn't match or isn't realistic, that, you know, we have to make a we decision as an agency. It's not just one individual, you know, and sometimes it takes getting more specific and drilling down deeper into details for my manager to buy into your idea, because of the history, because of the patterns, because of your reputation for not following through. So giving them a chance to give feedback at the end of the meeting is really key. What worked well, what will we do differently next time, helping them always feel like they have a voice in the process. So now I want to show you, as we wrap up, the actual safety plan that her network came up with. And that's in your network, if I can find it. Safety planning one. I think it's green. Quick pause. What's the difference between a signs of safety plan and a traditional case plan? Making sure that the network is included and the child is included might be one of the key differences. This signs of safety plan can become a case plan. So that's what I want you to know. You can write your case plan differently based on this activity with the family and their network, so that everybody's on the same page, and in our system, it's still documented. Make sense? Sometimes every county's different. You have drop downs with outcomes and indicators and different types of things that you have to click on in order to do it. But generally speaking, the things you come up with here will fit into the case plan topic categories. So insight and safety are not the same thing. We've talked about that, right? Being able to recognize that you don't have to have insight to get action, that action sometimes leads to insight. And we're finding with this process, that's actually happening more often than not. And that families are starting to say, wow, now that I'm doing something differently, I see why it's beneficial. So that's very cool, especially if it's like their kids are in their home and they're parenting them full time and they can see the difference. We had a couple come together who had a child with 50 bruises. The pediatrician reported 50 bruises on this little girl. And she was 6 and covered in bruises. How are we not going to deduce that she was abused or neglected by somebody? Both mom and dad report that she's an overactive child, hyperactive child. And the way they described her, we were starting to wonder, is she on the autism spectrum in some capacity? And she'd never been evaluated. She was absolutely the most active child our intensive foster care homes have found. All 3 foster homes that she blew out of within less than 3 months documented the same behavior. She does fly off of furniture. She is a child who is very hard to manage. And there was still something else unexplained, right? So she did get quite a few bruises, and she bruises easily, but 50, right? So we were still holding up the possibility that it might have been both mom's frustration, dad's frustration, physical abuse, and this kid is really, really hard to manage for anybody. And so once we help the parents with very specific parenting techniques and help them understand that if they try something else, they might get a different outcome, they did. And lo and behold, the child's behavior is minimized because they were letting her know what to expect in advance. They had a structure and a routine for her day. They were much more rigorous in adhering to the structure. Their parenting styles were getting closer together because they could not have been more opposite in how they were approaching the child. And the kid would do the splitting back and forth with mom and dad. Once they started to do what they were asked to do by the parent aid specialist, completely different kid. And therefore, they're encouraged that their parenting is actually better and going to help this child function better, so therefore they find it easier to parent. And that's what this whole process, when they got the network together, they came up with a plan. We got into detailed descriptions about how this child needed to be parented. She was returned home within 2 months of pulling the network together. And then 2 months post-reunification, they were meeting regularly every 4 to 6 weeks to check in on the progress. And all of the procured services were then shifted to third-party billable so that they could bill her health insurance in order to continue the services in place. And I just talked to the director a couple weeks ago and they closed the case. So it was about a 6-month turnaround, start to finish. And this family's doing great. And I said to the dad, I really wanted to videotape him and interview this guy and get a sense with an appreciative inquiry of how did it all go so well? And he said, it wasn't until you did that circles activity. And I realized then how isolated we had become, that all the people we used to rely on, we totally pushed out of our lives. And we self-medicated with substances instead of coping with the challenges in a more productive way. And instead of drawing people in to help us, we pushed them away. So being able to think about how do we get this group to take immediate action versus ongoing. So you can see during ER, you need to have an immediate safety plan, ongoing safety plan, and then this is really an aftercare plan. This is about making this translate into something that's going to stick after we pull out. How many times have we pulled out services and then the family falls apart? Right? That speaks to what you were saying about the dependency. We don't want to have families dependent on us. We want them to have a healthy interdependence with us and their community supports. So we want to make sure that we don't set families up for that. We want them to keep going with the plan. So these are all the steps. There's their network. And back to Kim and Paul. We had their danger statement, case outcome statement. Kim will work with CPS, Donna, and Ann to develop a plan that will show everyone that she will always be drug-free while she's caring for Paul, and that if she thinks she will relapse, she will ask for help from Donna and Ann and her safety network to ensure Paul stays safe. So that's the key. And we reminded her of the day she was cooking dinner and she chose to shoot up heroin. What could she have done differently in that moment if she indeed was still going to shoot up? And she agreed she could have taken him to Donna's or had Donna come get him. She could have called her NA sponsor and thought about not using, right? She could have had 6 other options than doing what she did. And that in the future, we have to know she's going to take those other options, or we can't have Paul come home, right? Here's their plan. Donna, Ann, Paul, Maria, that's her mom, Eve, so Paul and Maria are mom and dad, Eve's the aunt, Jenny's her best friend, all agree to be part of the network. So now we've expanded who's part of the network. She agrees to stay drug-free when she's caring for Paul. She'll begin supervised visits as we had talked about earlier, right? They agree to cancel, same stuff. If Kim feels like she's going to use, she agrees to call Donna, Ann, or Jenny. Donna, Ann, and Jenny all agree to call CPS in these instances. Mom has actually agreed to this. Mom signed a release, and Mom knows, and Jenny said, I'm your best friend, but I'm calling your social worker if you can't do this plan. That's how transparent these meetings are. And if we can't get that level of agreement, we're going to have to keep working till we do. Eve agrees to drive Kim to her individual treatment sessions with her therapist, Sam. Kim has given Sam permission to call CPS if he's worried she's using drugs again or does not come in for an appointment. This is Kim taking responsibility and telling her therapist, you can call my worker if I screw up. Jenny agrees to help Kim find a job by going along with her to interviews and filling out applications. Jenny agrees to check in with Kim at least 3 times a week to talk about how Kim's doing. How does that help you as a social worker feel better about this case? Yeah, wouldn't that be nice to know, right? Maria and Paul agree to help Kim financially, so thank God Donna and Ann don't have to keep giving her money. Her parents are going to take a turn until she gets a job, and they're taking Paul on vacation for 2 weeks during the summer. So there's 2 weeks of respite that Mom's going to be guaranteed to have during the summer when they go away for vacation. Kim agrees to give NA at least 1 more try. This has been the big battle. Social worker wanted Mom to do NA, and Mom said, no, I hate it. So they started to get creative. Maybe not this NA meeting, maybe you go this one. Well, that one I have to take a bus to get to, and maybe the people there are better. I don't know. So we finally figured out that there was an ex-boyfriend that went to the original NA meeting, and he still goes to those meetings, and she doesn't want to see him. Okay, well, if he's not a good support person, we don't really want to set her up either. Why force her to go to an NA meeting where she's going to get in trouble or get stressed out, right, if we can look at another option? By asking families to try on solutions, we get more buy-in. It's like when you go to buy a pair of shoes. How often do you buy a pair of shoes without trying them on first? Or regret it if you do, right? Oh, I'm always a size 6. All of a sudden you try these on, and then all of a sudden you needed a 6.5 in this brand, right? So making sure that we're open, especially where it's a negotiable, not a non-negotiable. Non-negotiable is she's got to figure out how to maintain some treatment, right? Because we know it contributes to her being a good mom. Negotiable is which treatment, right? If she's telling you, UAs aren't going to work for me, or this, and there's some other alternative, allowing her to try that other alternative. And then lastly, the safety network and the department agree to review the plan in 4 weeks. And so you can set up the distance and the time depending on your worries about the case, your worries about the network and how much compliance you're going to get from them. It doesn't always work. There are times when a network comes together, yeses you to death, and then falls apart, right? So being mindful that that could happen, but wanting to give benefit of the doubt, right? Checking in more often for those cases is a good idea. Questions? Because we are so out of time. How's that, Chelsea, for banging it out in 2 hours, right? Not even. Okay. What we wanted you to take away was kind of that soup to nuts process. That mapping is the start, and you want it to go through to the finish that looks like this. Can you do that on every case every time? No. We're well aware of that. But picking one case and trying it out, maybe in doing the 3 houses with that kid and getting that interview information back into the map can be a great way. And if you're talking about a return home, the safety house, which is in the interviewing children information that I'll leave for you, really helps the child participate in the planning. What would it have to look like in your home? What are the rules and who could be there versus who could not for you to feel safe going home? And the child physically writes out the rules. Or if they're too young, the worker can write it and put their words down. It's amazing when a parent sees a safety house and who's allowed and who's not and what their viewpoint is of the situation. And then those things can be incorporated into the plan. So it really is a really simplistic way of getting our families re-engaged in the process with us. And even at the end, if it doesn't work out, and there's a great interview of a dad from Minnesota who said, Your Honor, despite all of the efforts of this agency, I can't keep my daughter safe. I can't stop using. I can't manage my depression. And she was adopted by his sister, who lived in another state. And he did not blame the department. He did not blame the social worker. There was nothing adversarial. He said they even let her come home twice with a network of support people, and I still couldn't do it. And the second time, the 6-year-old said, Daddy, I don't think this is working, right? Like, she knew everybody had made the effort. She knew he did the best he could do, and there wasn't resentment there. She just knew that they couldn't stay that way. So being able to think about how we do what we do is just as much, if not more important than what we do, can help us get to a better place in one direction or the other. I currently have a case where the TPR trial has been postponed twice because the network had to have time to get together, be formed, and create this plan. And we gave just enough information to the court for them to buy into it and say, okay, we'll push the date back. So, you know, if that plan, which is currently being enacted, goes successfully through the summer, right, then that kid will come home for schools to start in the fall, and we'll monitor it for 6 months before we're willing to close it. So making sure that we're mindful that that time, there's no guarantee, and that they have to be flexible with us, because we can't promise them a date and deliver. It's all contingent upon what they do well. And the word "it depends" is always okay to use. So thank you for your time and attention. Thank you again for lunch. And if you guys have any questions at all while I'm here over the next day or two, just grab me on a break and we'll catch up, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can as you think about ways you can apply this to your practice. You're welcome. Thank you.